Rudolf Okonkwo. This week, President Jonathan ordered the release of the Pricewaterhousecoopers audit report of the NNPC. Now, the story of this report is more like the story of the Jonathan's administration. We are going to talk with Toyin Akinosho, who is the publisher of Africa Oil and Gas Reports. He's an expert in the industry, and he will let us know the intrigues behind this report. Mr. Akinosho, welcome to Sahara TV.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good morning.
Yeah. So let me start by just remind our viewers of how we got to question the activities of NNPC and how they are handling oil revenue. How did we get to that point?
The Governor of Central Bank, a little over a year ago, raised questions regarding how much he thought, the money was getting, into the Treasury from, the NNPC has joint venture accounts, with oil companies, the companies that produce most of Nigeria's roughly 2.2 million barrels of oil a day. And, that basically, that share of the account is essentially what constitutes the revenue of the federal government. How much a significant, percentage of the revenue that, comes into the national treasury, comes from that JV. The Governor of Central Bank was raising attention to some kind of leakage that, he felt was going on. And that essentially was how we got here. When my challenge was that, even though, what the president felt was, the federal government, the Governor of Central Bank was going to the public square, as it were, to raise an issue rather than, personally report that to him as president. That's the interpretation that I had, and he was suspended, which was also very unprecedented. The president must have felt so hot by the fact that the central bank governor was raising that sort of flag, over, how money was being appropriated by how money, generally that are meant to have come to the treasury wasn't getting there and seemed to be going to a few pockets. I would imagine ordinarily that the president himself will take that fairly seriously, and, that the governor of central bank, as the head of an independent institution, because it wasn't exactly he saying that the president did anything wrong. He simply was pointing to the fact that there was a leakage, in the way monies were getting to the federal treasury, and he wasn't seeing in the treasury the volume of money that he expected to find there. It was simply a question of what he considered a reduction. And it wasn't as if we were selling less crude oil. We just weren't getting... if you were in charge of an account and you kept on going back to your bank and you were saying that, there was a missing... what you expected to be in the, currently in the account wasn't there, and you raised that. I think it was genuine. That's the gentleman who saw what was coming into the treasury, and but it did look to me that the president felt, took it personally.
Now let me ask you now, who ordered this audit? remind our viewers, who decided that there should be an audit? Was it the Minister of Finance or was it the President?
The President announced the audit, but it was the Minister of Finance who advised the audit.
Okay.
Yes, it wasn't. I mean, from my understanding, from what I saw, it was the President that, said in a particular press conference that he had asked the audit to go on.
Okay.
But well, that's my.
Okay, that's your recollection. Okay, now what about the findings of the audit? What do you know so far?
I mean, so far what I know is that, what these guys are saying is that total gross revenues generated from, as of that time, was roughly 69.34. What my challenge about, some of these findings are about, regarding the way it came through to me was, and that's the thing about the forensic nature of things. You will be saying, no, this is 2 kobo, not 1.5 kobo, and I think that we need to be very careful, to just be looking at it at such, that level of detail. What's important, for me, is do we have a system where, if you generated X amount of money, that specific X amount of money actually goes to the Treasury? Or do we have a system in which, because what the PwC was tackling generally, even in the summary findings, even in the so-called executive summary, was something like, okay, it's 40 naira that you guys said, we made, but, it's actually 38 naira that we made. And that, no, it isn't 20 naira that was deposited there, it was 25 naira. That sort of thing. But my challenge is if you genuinely actually had a 13 naira difference, you still had a huge difference that wasn't reconciled a full year afterwards, So something like total gross revenue generated from the FGN crude liftings was $69.34 billion, which is even higher than $67 billion, stated by the Reconciliation Committee. And the total cash remitted, as of that time was 50, which was even far higher, than what, the central bank governor was saying. So we even had something huge. It says that the NNPC had provided information on the difference leading to potential excess remittance of 0.74 billion, and 2.81 billion, which were not part of the submission on the 70 committee, have been deferred to arrive at this position. My challenge basically in this, it did tell us that the report reflects the fact that $3.38 billion was spent on DPK subsidy for the review period. And it said a major consideration on the ownership of oil and gas assets controlled by NNPC, was an account, a minimum of, there was some account of a minimum of $1.8 billion that didn't quite get to the Treasury.
Now, Toyin, let me. Yeah, I know you can go in depth into this, but I want you to actually explain this to our viewers. This is a disclaimer on the report that says something like this report doesn't follow the standard of accounting standard. Essentially, the people who did the audit are saying that it's not reliable. What do you make of that statement that was there?
Well, apparently they too were worried about, the kind of, information they were getting. And, it's not PwC. You're saying that the PwC itself were saying that the figures were not reliable.
No,
right?
not the figures, that they did not, the review, that this should not be considered a standard review or a standard audit.
The way I interpreted that was that PwC was trying to say, hang on, don't hang us with this, because this is not the kind of review in which we are evaluating the standard annual report of a company, that we will have access to full information. Even the PwC itself is saying that they don't have access to the entire information that they ought to have. Analysts are saying that a whole lot of reports on gas proceeds from gas sales were not here. Don't forget that Nigeria is the fourth largest exporter of LNG, in the world, and this doesn't even show up at all. And that's the dividends of LNG proceeds have been something that have been, that are featured in the national conversation as, not showing up in when you reconcile figures of monies that come into the treasury. The NNPC has not been up, has never been open, has never, been able to come up to say this is the exact amount of money that it gets from proceeds of LNG sales. And that area is also missing in the report by PwC. So analysts have pointed this out, because you cannot, this is the hydrocarbon industry, this is petroleum industry. You cannot pretend that only oil, in a country that you have such a massive investment in delivery of gas to everywhere on the planet. You cannot claim that you cannot have a report, in this period of time, 18-month period, and not include gas sales. So that's one of the reasons that analysts are saying. And they're also saying that not everything, was, up in the open for the PwC to look at. And when you look at the summary, the summary that the PwC, gave earlier in the before this full report was released, you find out that there was a whole lot of trying to struggle, with as much information to come out. It seemed to me that somebody was trying to say, well, if we said this, people will interpret it, in a fairly negative manner. So they were trying to say, well, we're not knocking government. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you.
That they were trying to say, okay, hang on, we're asked to do this job, and we don't want to be seen as critics of government. And I saw that in the spirit behind that summary, that I read.
Yeah. Now, let's look at this. The Minister of Petroleum, Desiane Alison Madeke, said weeks ago, I think last week, before the report came out, that NNPC has started making repayments of the $1.48 billion. The report said mismanaged. Now, does that mean that she knew about this report, the content, and that they have decided that was the best way to handle it?
No, you do know that summary actually indicated that 1.48 billion. It did point that out clearly, that it was and the government was sort of trying to hang on to that and saying, no, we didn't, it's not $20 billion that was missing. It was 1.48 that showed up as not missing. But what I found out, even with that summary, was that 1.48 was just one of several items that couldn't exactly be accounted for properly. If you added up some of those things, you are getting to see at least over $3 billion that you could say that did not exactly reach the treasury or could not exactly be properly reconciled. But that 1.4 and $1.48 billion, loomed very large, and what they were saying was, okay, it's like, this is something that also have been paid, that wasn't paid. It was actually in that executive summary. So it was after, in fact, it was used for government to gloat, to say that, the NNPC itself came out in a press release saying, hey, look at what we're dealing with. You guys said let me just put it in a very interesting way. You guys said we stole $20 billion. But exactly, we only used $1.8 billion to do something, and we will release them to you. At first, it's sort of like very cynical that, even $1.48 billion, $1 billion in any economy is huge. And for the state hydrocarbon company to be talking about, okay, we're now paying it, the minister has ordered that to pay. I can't imagine, in a country, that, let's face it, it may be the largest economy in Africa on the basis of the fact that we have a population of 170 million people. That would amount to something, If you had a population of 170 million people, and you're huge, you are larger than the rest of Africa, and your people have been educated long before any country in Africa. You have to be you have to be bigger. And if you're so-called big economy, largest economy in the poorest continent on the planet, what's that? It's not like you are the largest economy in the Indian subcontinent. You just so that is a poor country still. If over 70% of revenue are coming from a source, you're still a very poor country. And if that volume of, crude oil that you're producing is smaller on a daily basis than most of the, than at least 5 or 6 or 7 countries in the world that have population, that are a fraction of yours. You are a small economy. You are really not consider that less than 15 million Angolans have almost an access to the same 2 million, maybe 1.8 million barrels of oil a day. So you really are a small economy. $1.48 billion is
it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
In that sort of economy.
Yeah. Toyin, we have to take a break, okay? When we come back, I want you to talk to us about oil subsidy, because we know that the National Assembly passed a budget without oil subsidy money. So we're going to take a break, and we'll come back for a part 2. Stay tuned.
All right.